Nearly everyone who has played The Wild at Heart, including the developers, will tell you that it is heavily inspired by Pikmin. You got different types of small creatures who do chores for you, a wacky cast of enemies, and a day-night cycle that drastically affects the gameplay loop. Even with all of these similarities though, the game does manage to feel unique. Now, before even beginning this game, I thought it would feature a more audacious story to help it stand out, and it does have that, but there are some caveats. The game stars Wake, a boy who runs far away from home to get away from his dad. He soon finds himself in the deep part of a woodland, one filled with fantastical creatures. After making his way to a village, Wake is ordered to bring home the lost townsfolk. Subsequently, once he meets up with a girl named Kirby, the two receive a quest to hunt down the 3 missing artifacts needed to revive the Green Witch. Now, this synopsis may seem a bit convoluted, but the game does an alright job of communicating its plot in a segmented form. The issue with the story is that it introduces conflicts that don't really go anywhere. The original premise it set up about a boy running away from a toxic relationship with his dad was a strong one. As the game progresses though, you'll realize how unimportant it is to the narrative, as the plot dissolves into a generic and cliche mess. I don't really mind the approach of having a more typical narrative backed by great gameplay, but I was led astray because of the more heartfelt moments throughout the first half of the game. Thankfully, the characters are well written to compensate for the overarching narrative. Wake and Kirby develop a touching relationship that displays their more childlike attributes, and even the side characters from the woods can be relatable and charming thanks to their dialogue. Overall though, I was let down by the story. The puzzle solving here is incredibly reminiscent of the Pikmin games, but there are some fresh ideas that make it stand out. The Spritelings, which are this game's Pikmin, are extremely versatile, and even more diverse when you examine the unique traits of the different types of them. For example, the Shiverlings can be thrown through ice portals and they will appear in another location. The Lunalings can bypass corruption so you can get certain items. The Barblings can break crystals. Each type of Spriteling has unique traits that contribute to the puzzles throughout the game. Of course, all of them can also break walls, move objects, and defeat enemies, like in Pikmin. The mechanics are heightened even more once Kirby joins you, because you are able to control both characters. You'll need to use Wake's abilities to help out Kirby, and vice versa. I especially love how this feature allows the game to introduce new perspectives on mechanics. For example, the first time you have to build a bridge, crossing it marks actual progress, whereas when you encounter a bridge again, now with Kirby, assembling it just allows the other character to get to you. These sorts of ideas definitely help to build the Metroidvania-like structure of the game. Yes, The Wild at Heart is very much a Metroidvania, even though it doesn't reflect the principles of the genre. There is a sprawling map, although its size is nothing to scoff at, and ability-locked progression. Once you find a new type of Spriteling, a plethora of new opportunities will open up. The same goes for when you find Kirby, as she can squeeze through wooden tunnels and get rid of these toxic pieces of sludge. The world is constantly being recontextualized and becoming more explorable whenever you unlock new mechanics, and that's an element I love about Metroidvania games. The Wild at Heart feels somewhat lacking though due to its rough sense of progression. Here's one example of it. In order to obtain the artifact for the Green Witch in one area, you need to collect 60 oysters in sets of 10. 50 of the oysters can be obtained with just 4 out of the 5 types of Spritelings, but the remaining 10 require you to get that last type, which is the Lunaling. In order to get the Lunalings, you have to go to a separate region and complete a set of objectives. It really takes you out of what you're doing when you have to backtrack to a place you've already been to do something you were meant to do earlier. These sorts of road bumps are pretty disheartening, but aside from them, I think this game fantastically emulates the Metroidvania structure in a new context. Even with the creative puzzle solving and innovations in its structure, the music and art direction managed to overshadow the rest of the game. Seeing this art style for the first time, I could have sworn it had been used in a billion other games, but that's not the case. The art style takes more inspiration from TV, in fact. It looks a lot like some animated shows that have aired over the past 2 decades. The soundtrack perfectly matches the goofy charm of the game. There are definitely some standout bangers, like Greycoat's theme, which I was sad to only hear once in my playthrough. That said, the different regions all have catchy themes to match their ambiance, and you'll never get worn out by them. The soundtrack not only perfectly coexists with the art direction, but both the art and music reflect the tone of the game. The Wild at Heart was definitely a surprise to me. With the insane number of indie games from new developers on the horizon, I can't tell which ones are something special and which ones are mount-worthy. This game is the former. I definitely have issues with it, like its deceivingly heartfelt narrative, the road bumps and the long sequences of objectives, and I didn't even mention the frame rate dips. That being said, I admire how ability-locked progression is utilized throughout its duration, the amount of creativity displayed in the puzzle solving, and the overall charm of this game. Its positives certainly outweigh its negatives. 8 out of 10.